بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، وبعد. أسعد الله صباحكم بكل خير، ويطيب لنا أن نلتقي معكم مجددا في ثاني أيام منتدى الأحساء 2025، فأهلا ومرحبا بكم. صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير السعود بن طلال بن بدر محافظ الأحساء، حضورنا الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدنا أن نفتتح أولى جلساتنا الحوارية تحت عنوان الحوكمة والإدارة في عام 2025 ماتحتاجه للتفوق. ويشاركون في هذه الجلسة سعادة الدكتور عبدالله بن عبد الرحمن الجغيمان، مشرف إدارة الاستثمار وتنمية الموارد جامعة الملك فيصل، وسعادة الدكتور جاي بنفن جيتون شركة هيدريك اند ستراتيجيز، وسعادة الأستاذ عمرو شولي الرئيس التنفيذي للحوكمة وإدارة المخاطر في بوبا العربية. ويدير هذه الجلسة الأستاذ جون جوليفر، فليتفضلون.
All delegates for today's forum. Ideally, even though we've got a short time, I hope that we find an opportunity to take any burning questions, because while I have an expert panel, I think more important is to get questions from you so that it's more relevant for you here in Al-Hassa. Mentioning Al-Hassa, I should also thank the Chamber for bringing us all together. We have half an hour or so to discuss some big topics ranging from governance, integrating environmental and social factors into the decision-making behind board decisions, governance, and also stewardship, which to me, in many ways, is the umbrella for what I've just outlined. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel, starting on my left with Dr. Jay Bevington, partner at Heidrick & Struggles, the executive search firm and leadership advisory. He also happens to represent Heidrick & Struggles as a strategic partner of GCC Board Directors Institute. He's worked with many global brands, both public, private sectors, and for the last 5 years, he's been in the region, meaning the GCC, particularly the Kingdom, advising many Saudi board chairs. Prior to that, he had over 20 years' experience as a senior partner at Deloitte, where he was responsible for global governance, including advising the global board and the global board chair. Interestingly to me, not that it's that relevant, I don't think, we'll soon see, he's a qualified clinical psychologist, and being a football fan, I'm pleased to say that he's a former English Premier League agent, football agent. So I don't know if we'll be able to get to that. If I can go to the end, I'm going to introduce a gentleman actually from Al-Hassa, so he's got a big advantage over all of us because he'll know you. Dr. Abdullah Al-Jugayman, who is the Vice Chair of the Al-Hassa Valley Company Board. He's Associate Professor of Finance at King Faisal University. He's Director Investment and Resources Development at the university. And he's also the CFO for the investment fund of the university. Previously, he was Vice Dean, College of Business for Scientific Research and Postgraduate Studies. And then the gentleman in the middle, I'm very proud to say, is actually a certified board director of the GCC Board Directors Institute. So thank you very much, Amro Showley, Chief Governance Risk and Control Officer at Booba Arabia. So he comes from the other side of the country in Jeddah. Thank you for joining us. He's also the chair of the Cybersecurity Committee and the Assurance Group Committee, among other roles he plays at Booba Arabia. He's on the main board of Baraka Financial, and previously he was the Chief Audit Officer of Vision International Investment Company and Chief Auditor of Aramco America. And I think for the purposes of the discussion, I mentioned governance. I'm actually going to start with Amro to just give us some context around where governance sits in the kingdom and how it has been evolving. Amro.
Thank you, John. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, thank you for starting with me. I appreciate putting me on the spot right away from the beginning, but I will let that go for now. I think when I participate in these panels, I always try to bring a sense of what's going on in the market, in the job place right now, in order to connect with the theory and everything you hear through all the days from other experts in the market. So I usually, if I want to talk about where we are, I like always to start with the government first and what's happening in the environment that the market is actually working on right now, then go all the way to the marketplace. I think if we look, and it's easy to say, and I think it's very obvious, with the vision of 2030, we've seen a plethora of regulations and law coming in and kicking in that's supporting governance within the country. That's first and foremost. Within that, you've seen also a plethora of governmental vehicles coming up that one of its main roles is to ensure proper governance within the marketplace. 2024, for example, we have the GRC law established, and which is a great and an excellent indicator where we're heading and where we want to be. And if you take that and you move down a little bit into the marketplace, you will see also that the marketplace is going through a lot of changes right now. I think it's needless to say, considering the environment and of the corporate environment of Saudi Arabia, you will see there is a great deal of family-owned businesses. I mean, if you look at the statistics, you will see at least 60% of the GDP, depending on what year you're actually looking at and what research you're looking at, but you're averagely saying 60% of GDP is coming up from family-owned businesses. And this brings along with it another type of challenges, how you protect wealth, how you ensure succession planning, how you move, how you ensure that that you protect value, that it goes through generation and you protect it as such. So if you look at all of that, you come up with the specific challenges that right now in the marketplace we're trying to combat and trying to factor in, and we're trying to make sure the state-of-art governance and modern governance is applied in a corporate Saudi Arabia. One of the example one of my favorite example is merit-based appointment in board of directors. Versus the conventional way, the social-related way that it used to be done. Diversity in the board of directors. This is another challenge that we're trying to enforce. And in diversity, I have to be careful because we don't want to be diverse for the sake of diversity. You want to be diverse because you want to recognize talent, and you want to bring it as such, regardless of its orientation. I think another challenges we face in the marketplace is dealing with modern risk elements, such, for example, ESG. And I think my colleagues here will talk more about ESG and next. But how you can take a certain board and convince them to invest in ESG and show them the value and create the proper governance structure for it. I think the last part I want to talk about when it comes to the modern challenges is how you bring modern technology into the board, how you bring modern technology into governance. And when we talk about that, we're not talking about the buzzword AI, for example, and I think a lot of you heard it and talk about it. But we're not even talking about that. You're talking about how you protect the value of the company through proper cybersecurity measures, how you introduce cybersecurity to the board, how you assign accountability to your board of directors, that cybersecurity actually is one of their main concerns. And you go even extra mile by appointing board members who are expert in this field in order to make sure that you have a proper governance. So again, John, I give you a warning before we start. If you let me talk, I will keep talking. So until you stop me, I will keep going. But I think this gives you, I'm hoping with this summary, it gives you a little bit of a generic view of what's going on in the marketplace from a regulatory point of view all the way to the corporate. I'd like to use that term, corporate Saudi Arabia, and what practices we've been using so far.
Thank you, Amro. So Amro mentioned governance, risk, and compliance, and I'd like to come back to that in a few minutes, Amro. Otherwise, you will be taking up all the mic time. And you also introduced some key trends, not least, of course, digitalization in terms of the way we look at governance frameworks and the way that we actually perform our governance duties. So again, I'm going to come back on that particular trend. And at the same time, I'm looking at you, wonderful delegates, and thinking you must have some questions. So do get ready for when we get to the point where we can pass a mic round, and feel free to ask your questions. But let's turn to a subject, certainly where I come from, that isn't having the best of times. So that is that wonderful acronym ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance Factors. And you know, at the end of the day, there's many reasons why that might be the case. And yet, I sit here in the Kingdom, I sit here in the GCC, and I feel very confident about the way that decisions are made through integrating factors around the environment, factors around society, Amro just touched on, diversity and inclusion, in terms of what you do as leaders, in terms of governance. So I'm going to turn to Dr. Abdullah, who I introduced shortly, or a short while ago. And what struck me about his roles is that a lot of what he does is essentially around money and investment, and presumably making the right decisions on behalf of the university and on behalf of the organizations that he works for. So, Dr. Abdullah, just thinking about ESG, how is that increasingly embedded into governance in your role, but also more broadly in the Kingdom?
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. السلام عليكم, حياكم الله جميعا. سعيد صراحة بتواجدي معكم هنا. I think in the recent few years, the role of ESG practices in investment decision-making in Saudi Arabia has shifted from a secondary consideration to become a mainstream strategic priority. These evolutions maybe have been done because of many reasons. First reason, I would say the Saudi 2030 visions, which has a number of initiatives and goals regarding sustainability, diverse economics, and also responsible business practices. Another governmental identity that focuses on ESG and sustainable development is the Sovereign Wealth Fund. The BIF introduced and integrated sustainability to its strategic targets. This, of course, allowed them to establish a number of companies, such as that with the goal of ESG practices, such as CERC, for example. We have seen that company established by the BIF. Also Aqua Power company, all those companies are related to sustainability goals. Also, we have seen some capital market reforms. If we see the Tadawul exchange introduced ESG disclosure guidelines. This allows companies and the markets to align with international sustainability standards. Again, last things I would like to talk about is the growing institutional interest and awareness regarding ESG practices. This allows investors, either local investors or international investors, to take in consideration ESG in their evaluation for investments and also risk assessment. So if I would like to talk about also the trends, maybe organizations should start to focus on investing in renewable energy, focusing on effective governance, and participate more in social impacts. That's maybe also something organization has to take in consideration. The diversity, as my colleagues talk about, and participate in responsible businesses, all these together, enhancing, taking the ESG in consideration while taking investment decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, and I really like the way that you emphasize sustainability, because often, as I started, whether we throw the acronym around here or there, it can be lost in terms of what we really mean, what we really should be doing as responsible decision makers. And I think the point you made around sustainability, particularly from the kingdom's point of view, in many ways says it all, because often you can learn from either the mistakes or ways of others or not, and often you can leapfrog and take the opportunity to actually lead, and that's very much what I take away from your comments. So thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I'm now going to turn to this term stewardship. Coming from the UK, there's a well-known stewardship code, which is almost the other side of the funding equation. So of course, corporate governance codes for the issuers or the companies that need to raise capital. And then on the other side, the so-called stewardship code, thinking about the providers of finance, so the investment community. So when I was talking to Dr. J, I was intrigued, other than looking at his bio, about what he might mean by stewardship in the context of what we're talking about, governance, and what difference in terms of effectiveness at board level that actually makes. Give us some context on stewardship. Dr. J.
Thank you, John, and salam alaikum. Thank you for having me here today. So yeah, when I think let's go back to basics and first principles, and we've got to ask ourselves, if we sit on a board, if we're working with boards, what does it mean to govern? When I'm governing, what am I doing? And in essence, I'm doing three things. I'm exercising oversight, which I think a lot of boards, especially boards in the kingdom, still think of their role around that oversight of management, regulatory compliance, the management or the oversight of risk. Now that's clearly a very important part and a very important role of every board. But there are also two other very important roles. The other is around accountability. So to whom are we accountable as a board? Are we clear on that accountability? If you're a family business, could be a family office. If obviously you're a listed company, it will be shareholders. If you're a government entity, it will be ultimately government at large. But being very clear on to whom are we actually reporting into, to whom are we accountable to. You mentioned stewardship, John. I mean, for me, that is where boards add and can add the most value. So stewardship, in my mind, is the third role of a board. And stewarding is all about ensuring that the organization, the enterprise, is viable, will remain viable in the long term. So that means being clear on strategy, being clear on the purpose of the firm, being the purpose of the entity, but also being clear on our culture and being clear on the talent within the organization. What are our talent management strategies? How are we handling CEO succession for example. It's a truism that, a board can do nothing about the past. It can do very little about the present, but it can do a huge amount about the future. And that, for me, is where stewardship really comes in and why it is obviously so important.
And can you give us an example from the kingdom of excellence in stewardship as you defined it? I mean, you don't necessarily have to name companies or individuals, but just to give us some context around what you're seeing and whether, in terms of the 3 points you mentioned, which ended with stewardship, that huge umbrella, as I put it, where are we? And share an example of where it's really, really happening.
So I think we've still got some way to go. And I noticed my good friend Lord Grimstone in the audience, who's speaking later. And Jerry and I have spoken a lot over the years about this notion of board impact. We often think that we have to have a board legally, constitutionally. When people become board members, when they become a chair of a board, this is a high status position. But I think with that comes huge responsibility, a bit like Uncle Ben in Spider-Man, right? With power comes great responsibility. And therefore boards need to think very openly. They need to talk about, they need to discuss what value are we actually providing to management. Are we, as a result of board dialogue, as a result of the committee conversations that we're having, is management changing their ideas, changing their proposals as a direct result of that exchange? I have a test for every board that I ever work with, and that test is simply, can the board members, but also can management, clearly articulate, consistently articulate, why is the business successful, right? Because going back to stewardship, if you're not clear on what has actually delivered that success and been honest about it, sometimes it could be favorable market conditions, for example. It could be a charismatic, highly successful founder. But being really clear on why is this business successful? Why are we making money? Why are we delivering good for the wider community? Then obviously you can serve to protect that. So there are, I think there are some family businesses I'm working with that really get that, get their stewardship role, and are having an impact. Some of the big corporates that I'm working with also get that. But I think for a lot of boards, there's still quite a long way to go.
Okay, so sort of a salutary response to my question on excellence, but we all know what we're trying to aspire to. I'm conscious that we've already managed to get through 2/3 of our allotted time, so I am just sort of hoping that there is a roving mic, and if there are any questions based on what I've already asked the 3 panelists, please feel free to ask. If not, I will carry on with the questions. There's a gentleman there, so if we could have a mic for the gentleman on the left-hand side from where I'm sitting. Where's the mic? Oh, mic coming up behind you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and thanks also to the panelists. Very interesting. And my question is directed to Dr. J. Now, with your experience, the 3 panelists focused on business, by and large. How about the government? If we talk about the vision 2030, I remember the governance framework was announced even prior to the official launch of the vision. So my question is, what's your take? The government, regulatory regimes, progress there, interplay with compliance and so on and so forth. So what's your take when it comes to the governance of the vision and making sure that there is delivery there? Thank you very much.
So I think I spoke at a conference yesterday. It's always interesting when you're mic'd up here because you can't always hear what the audience is saying. But I think it was certainly around, governmental entities, the extent to which, or the 2030 vision, which is, an extraordinary vision. I mean, I think, unparalleled, globally, and it has been, an absolute privilege and a pleasure to work in the kingdom for the last 5 years. I mean, I think from a sort of, first principles, governance principles basis, I still think, stewardship, oversight, accountability still apply. I still think we can talk about this notion of board impact that I discussed, a board that is really enabling an organisation to be successful. I still think, that is all relevant, certainly with the government entities that I'm working with and have worked with historically. I think there are a number of, not necessarily unique, but there are a number of challenges with government entities and with government boards, and that is that often people are your senior colleagues, your senior Saudis are often extraordinarily busy people. They've often got full-time executive careers, and then they sit on boards or on committees. So I think the overboarding is quite a key issue for the kingdom, and indeed for the wider Middle East. And that's, I'm not saying that as a criticism at all. I'm saying that as a simple observation that, your firepower, your senior firepower is spread incredibly thin over many, many different governing forums, and that makes getting to know the organisation, getting to know how it's structured, how it's organised, the culture of that organisation, in order to add, real value at board level. I think that makes it more difficult. I think the other thing I notice with a lot of governing entities is the boards are big, right? You have a lot of people. We know from a good old psychological perspective that between 8 and 12 people, in a governing body is about right. Anything less than 8, then you don't get the diversity of perspective. Anything more than 12, then your decision making and ultimately your execution is not quite as agile. And obviously government entities tend to have much bigger boards, and therefore that comes down to the chair, to facilitate and chair meetings. Well, they've got a sort of an added, an added responsibility, I think, there. So.
Thank you, Dr. Chair. I'm conscious there's a question there, and the gentleman probably closest to the mic. So let's work our way along the line. We've still got time. So thank you very much. Thank you for the questions.
Good morning, Khalid Al-Uthman. I'm chairman of the National Committee for Sustainability and Green Economy, Federation of Chambers, and thank you for the interesting panel. 2 quick questions, one for Amr. Between the dilemma of over-regulation and under-regulation, can you comment on that? And I mean, how to create the right balance of the right regulation and governance structure, both in government and private sector? And for Dr. Abdullah, how can we utilize governance to enhance environmental and sustainability practices across the board, not just the governance for the sake of governance itself?
Thank you.
I think, just to make sure I heard the question properly, I think the first part is about regulation, over-regulation, what we do in the marketplace to comply with that and make sure we adopt that. And the second question was? Second question.
Yeah, second.
Okay, perfect. Let me at least address the first part, and Doctor, you will go ahead. I think the way at least we're doing it is we are aware. We've been partnered with the regulator. So all these regulations, for example, that is coming and governing a certain industry, and I will use the insurance industry, for example, because I come from there. So we were aware, for example, with the insurance authority establishment, we were aware what kind of shape and form the insurance authority will take on, what kind of regulation they will introduce to the market. Because before all these regulations come to the market, there is a clear partnership between the marketplace and the regulator on the effect, because we help them study the effect, the impact, and avoid any unintended consequences of some of the regulations. So we've been partnering with the regulator through the whole journey. And when it comes, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a surprise, because the marketplace has been preparing for it. They've been part of the discussion. They've been invited to the room to speak of the risk, to speak of their mind and opinion and the value proposition that comes out of it. And that dialogue actually limit to a great extent the impact of the volume, either it's a high volume or a low volume, or the impact of certain regulation. So I think we found that experience with the insurance authority is very helpful. We found that experience when we worked with CHI, Majlis al-Daman before, and we find it extremely very helpful. And even under the patronage of SAMA, when we were under SAMA, we were doing exactly the same exercise. So if there is a recommendation for me to other industry, to the other regulators to follow the same suit, bring the marketplace into the table, have that discussion, assess the risk together, then when the regulation comes, it's a matter of time just to comply with it. And at least this is from my own experience dealing with these three powerful entities in the kingdom.
Do you mind moving the mic to the gentleman here in front of me? I beg your pardon.
No, it's okay. I think he has a second point.
As the mic's moving,
that's okay.
please.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I'm just conscious. Do you have the mic? The gentleman here wanted to ask a question. Gentleman in front of me, I believe. Yes. Could we have the mic over here?
John?
And then there's one other gentleman over here. And then I'm almost up, but you've been a fantastic audience.
The second part of the question is with
Please,
Dr. Abdallah.
please.
Okay, thank you very much. If I understand your question correctly, you're asking how governance and how board and management can integrate ESG practices to their governance framework. I think, first of all, board of directors and top management levels has to integrate the ESG practices to their corporate strategy at the beginning place. Second things, they have to enhance their board oversight regarding, like through maybe establishing ESG or sustainability committees that will help them to monitor and oversee the ESG firm performance or organization performance. Second, maybe at the company or the top management levels can also enhance their transparency through disclosure regarding ESG practices.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. And the gentleman in front of me.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Abdurrahman al-Khail, Dan Company CEO. Worldwide, there are a lot of examples of great companies with great boards who went bankrupt or had to go through a very hard transformation. Would you please shed some light on the governance in terms of importance of board of directors selection process and evaluation and impact on those companies' organization sustainability in terms of financials and other sustainability aspects? Is the question clear?
I think that's a question for you, because it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, evaluation. So how do you evaluate a board to get what we're aspiring?
Yeah, exactly. How you evaluate the board of directors selection process and their impact on organizational sustainability? Thank you.
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I've spent since 2003 doing work in this area, and with Jerry and with others, really debating and thinking it through. I mean, I think there are probably two or three things that I would talk about in terms of enabling boards to be their most effective and to be most impactful. You know, and I think the first point I'd make is it does start with you. You know, it starts with individual board members. You know, they need to be making a difference. They need to be adding value. And I think every board member should be able to answer the question, you know, why would anybody listen to me, right? So they have to have a, you know, relatively unique contribution. That could be through their expertise, through their networks, through the markets that they understand, but it has to start with you know, with individuals. And I think Jerry would I'm sure agree with me here. Good boards are all about good chairing, right? So the leadership of the board is fundamental. I mean, I would go as far as to say, you know, if you could run some kind of, you know, statistics or some kind of empirical research, I'd say that the chair, you know, and his or her ability and attitude and commitment is probably about 70% of the solution, but it's also potentially 70% of the problem. I've tried and I've failed to develop boards around ineffective chairs. So the chair themselves, the leadership of the chair is paramount. And the third and final thing I would say is when you're doing a board evaluation, adopt an outside-in approach. And what I mean by that is start with the people that don't necessarily sit on the board, but nevertheless are involved in the board through presentations, or influenced by the board, could be executive management, for example, and get their perspective and get their opinion on how effective this board is. Because just asking the board itself, you get this thing called a social positive response bias. You know, we all like to think of ourselves as doing a good job. So you have to start outside of the board and work your way in.
I'm incredibly...
They're getting time outside.
Yeah, I'm incredibly sorry. I've literally run out of time. I'm conscious the gentleman over there has a question, so I'm going to ask the speakers to make their way off the stage that end and address the gentleman, because I'm literally being told, stop. Is that right? Unless someone can quickly give that gentleman a mic. But if not, I'm going to ask you to thank our amazing panelists. Doing the right thing is never the wrong thing. Ted Lasso.
ويتفضل معالي المهندس عبد اللطيف العثمان رئيس مجلس الأمناء المنتدى لتكريم المشاركين. From there.